Hello, and thank you for joining us. Today's program, Don't Be a Stranger, Communicating During COVID-19 is especially important. Every individual and every business has seen and experienced dramatic changes over the past several weeks. Now, more than ever, how companies communicate is critical. Briefly, my name is David Gabor, and I'm an employment attorney who helps keep employers out of trouble through strategic review of policies and training. I also handle some litigation. But far more importantly, today I am honored to be joined by Judy Rakowsky. She applies experience and insights from a career in journalism to the communications challenges of organizations and individuals. As a senior vice president with Liberty Square Group, she has been helping many clients deal with CV-19 crisis, including helping organizations update their audiences on how they are keeping people safe and taking utmost care with vulnerable populations. She sees communication as a top strategic tool that companies underuse. Judy, what can and what should companies be doing today?
Well, thank you, David. I'm glad to have this opportunity. Companies, just like us individuals going through this pandemic, are having a hard time acting like they might normally do, and that is to communicate with all of their audiences and remind them what they really are about and how they do their business. When you don't communicate, you let others fill in the gaps. And given this heightened time of anxiety and fear, people are more likely to grasp onto scary scenarios or something that they think might be happening. And the problem is that if the company or the organization or even an individual doesn't say anything else, that rumor mill gets to churn on. And even though there's no water cooler where we're gathering these days, we all know that social media is really putting gas on those fires. So you have a story to tell. You have ways that you are doing the right thing, taking care of people, whether it's people who are furloughed, people who are working in essential jobs. And so you need to tell your story and remind people and the public that you are there and you're the same organization, the same company doing the right thing that you have been all along.
Oh, that's great. Is there anything in particular you want to share with people regarding messaging?
So message is a big topic. It needs to be something that you develop with some people that understand the different levels of messaging and the strategy behind it, because it's not just about saying whatever you feel like saying right now, because what that might do is include some of our anxiety, our fear, and right now we need to kind of get a grip and say what we mean and try to calm people and convey to them that we're thinking, we're doing what we know to be the right thing. We're making good decisions, even at a time when things are a little crazy. So you want to be strategic about messaging, and you also want to convey your core values. And even, let's just say you're a company that can't operate right now. You still want to remind folks who you are and how you do business and how long you've been around and the reason why you've been there in the past and what you've gotten through. You see more entities telling their story, what they've been through in the past, and also to use that to say that we are going to be there for you. We're going to be back, and you want to hold on to your customers. You want to hold on to the market position that's hard to cling to right now. It's really an opportunity to communicate, everything that you are, and also add in the tactics and elements that really apply to this particular situation. whether it's something that you need to communicate that you've had to do differently or that you're going to do in the future. And you have to make sure that your message doesn't overpromise and doesn't say anything that you might have to change later, because now more than ever, your word is your bond to all of your audiences.
You know, that's so true. When you talk about overpromising, and that's something I'm going to talk about later on in the program, that's an example where people could get in trouble. But you say this is really a good time to reinforce core values. Can you give an example maybe of that?
Yes. You know, whether you're an entity that is caring for a vulnerable population and you get an opportunity to remind people of how much you've always taken care of this vulnerable population and the contingency planning you've done, and you know how you're keeping staff safe, how you're doing things right. This is a chance for an organization like that to really say, because of who we are, that's why we're doing this right. That doesn't mean that things might not, you know, bad things might not happen. We know what we're up against here with this incredible virus. But if you can show who you are and that went into how you're conducting yourselves now, you really have a chance to, you know, mute some of the fears, or at least explain just how you do your business. Or perhaps you're someone that's in an essential, you know, service or an essential industry providing food. If you tell us that because of your core values, that you are paying people more, taking great pains to protect their health and make sure that anybody on the front lines is really being protected to your utmost capacity, and at this time, that really is very, very influential in how people feel about you as a company. And the companies that are doing that are the ones that are doing better. It's not a coincidence.
So basically, it's getting out in front of the situation. That's really good advice. So one of the things I think that a lot of companies are going to be thinking right now, okay, this is wonderful, but how do we get our message out there? What kind of suggestions do you have in terms of how employers can get the message out? Who do they want to reach? How can they go about reaching them? Can you talk about that, please?
Sure. So what I often do when I first speak to a company that hasn't really thought about this is I start to say, okay, who is it that you absolutely want to make sure hears from you right now? And you know, if you're a nonprofit, you may want to make sure that your big donors are hearing from you. If you're a company that, you know, it could be your banks, all of your elements of business that you communicate on a regular basis. It could also be your customers, your vendors, your suppliers, it could be government entities in the area in which you operate. And whether or not those are active right now, whether or not you're busy right now and working, you still need to make sure that they know you're there and that you are a going concern. So once you make your list, and a lot of you may be publicly held, you may need to think about your shareholders. You may be in a situation in which the press is watching you all the time, for good or for ill. You may want to get out that you're doing something great, that you've switched to an innovative way of operating, and maybe you're doing it for free. There's all kinds of ways and situations in which you may want to be communicating. Then the next thing you need to think about is, how do these folks get their information? There are people that are not on social media. There are people that they only are on social media. There are folks that you're going to reach them by email. That's the only way. You have to think about what's their native form of communication. What channel do you reach them on? if you normally have an e-blast that you send out a couple times a month or a couple times a quarter, you should continue that. If you have ways of driving people to your website for updates, that you should continue. But you might also consider a special communication. I think we've all received some of those special communications about, here we have resources. Even if we're not, even if you're not actively using our service, we can be an aggregator of good information, credible information about the virus and what's going on. And, everyone wants to be helpful, but you need to reach your audiences in a way that you normally would, and also to make sure they know that you're really thinking of them now and that you value your connection with them.
I think that's really helpful. I know I'm getting bombarded, with some days more than 200 emails coming into my inbox. Are there steps that maybe they can be thinking about so that your message is not 1 or 200 emails coming over to me?
Well, I think back to my point about people sending out, we can help you get to good information. I share what you're seeing, David, in that I'm getting a lot of that now, and it's not really what I'm, really needing. You really want to, it has to go with who you are and what you do anyway. If my local sandwich shop is sending me emails about COVID-19 resources, that's really not helpful to me. But
hey, that's food for thought, right?
But if they're sending me, like I know that there's takeout in my neighborhood, but who's doing it how, that might be relevant. So it has to sort of suit, what you do and how you are functioning now. And, even if I'm not taking advantage of that particular service, it's still kind of good to know that they're there. So there's a lot of reassurance that goes with communicating right now. Again, our ambient, the backdrop here is just such a very high-strung, high-anxiety time that, just finding ways to still reach out and not be annoying is really the order of the day.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think people love war stories. And can you think of any examples where messaging missed the mark?
Yes, I have some videos that I sometimes show, because a lot of businesses think that the only people who can, who would consider getting a little help with communications at this time are big, multinational corporations that have, teams of lawyers and teams of PR people. But the reality is that a lot of them either they don't listen or they don't get good advice during these times. And one of them I often point to is the CEO of Boeing, after, the successive crashes that killed hundreds of people. And he got up there, and not only did he read his notes that said that he was sorry that people had died, he hardly took a breath before he went on to say, but every day we get lots of people to their destination safely. Well, it goes back to the original case that people point to for crisis communications, which was the Tylenol case. And in that, Johnson & Johnson empathized with the people who were harmed by basically the adulteration of the Tylenol with cyanide, which was not part of their manufacturing. It was something that someone inserted, a criminal did it. But they took the time to empathize with the people who were harmed, and they said, we're going to fix this, and we're going to keep you apprised of what we're doing to fix it. And that empathy and transparency is literally the absolute essential of messaging at a time when something bad happens. It's amazing. And Johnson & Johnson, everyone thought that Tylenol would go away. And I think we're like 30 years out, and I think we can still get Tylenol.
when I have a headache, that's for sure. So what could Boeing have said, do you think, maybe that, off the cuff, where they could have messaged something that would reinforce, like you were talking earlier about core values? What could they have said maybe?
Well, it's not that they never should have said that they generally do a good job, because, obviously they have, but the empathy wasn't believable, and it wasn't, they didn't spend enough time really going into that. I think, and this is going to lead into, perhaps what you're going to talk about in terms of legal ramifications. A lot of times organizations are thinking about liability, and they're thinking about, God forbid we should get sued for anything we do, and that's what's ruling them. But if you really connect with people and say how much you care, that alone, I'm not a lawyer, as you know, but that alone is not exposure. So they could have really just at least, really taken some time to spend, on just how devastating it is to lose loved ones in a plane crash. And that does not take responsibility, which gets into the litigation part. But empathy is cheap, but if you forget it, then people turn against you. And I remember watching that video, crossing my office and seeing it on CNN, and went, uh-oh, that missed the mark.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I actually was not going to touch on that fine line when you do speak to a tragedy that happens, but you're right. I can counsel a client to say, this was a horrible experience. Our hearts go out to everyone involved in this. It is such a shame, so unfortunate, and we stand behind anyone who works with our product. We can talk about that without saying that we screwed up, and I think there's a big difference on that. So that's a really good point. So I wanted to talk to you a bit about communicating with your team. Are there any suggestions you have regarding communication with the team? And you and I both know, how important the team is.
Absolutely. I think that it's what people forget about, because they are worried about their external communications. But I did have a situation during COVID where the company had done everything right, but to keep their team safe, their workers safe, but they didn't really communicate about that. And it goes back to the rumor and innuendo from up top that became, something that they really had to face. Your team is, it could be it could be the separation of the people out on the staff versus your internal team. Either way, the more they know what you're doing in the best way, the more you can change the perceptions, lower the temperature of fear and anxiety, particularly at this time. You may not be, everyone thinks that they should be absolutely ready, that everything should be all buttoned down and tied in a bow before you communicate. But that's really where, particularly in a crisis, you can, not achieve your goals. If you show the effort, show how you are trying to include folks and what you are trying to accomplish, even before it's all done, you can, even if it's about, we're working on plans to keep as many people as we can, to pay as many people as we can. This is not gonna go well to some people who are hearing this. But sometimes if you show your effort and your intent during, midstream, it can actually really keep a united team together and actually make people feel. Now, I'm not trying to say you're going to tell something before you're ready to tell it, but if they can see what you are up to, and also to include people or find a way, the reality about a crisis is that everyone thinks that you can be very hierarchical sometimes and the decision, flows down. But when you have so much going on at once in a crisis, things can freeze because everyone's waiting for direction from above. If you can sort of pull out subgroups to work on smaller projects, and then they are getting some communication to bubble up, then you have more of a dynamic going on, and everyone's not waiting for one decision maker, which by definition at a time like this means delay.
That's a great point. Employees communicate with each other, even if they're not at work and they're remote, they're talking to each other, and employers cannot tell them not to because under the National Labor Relations Act, employees have a right to communicate with each other. So if there's no message coming from the company on what's happening, what they're doing, what they're trying to do, or it's inadequate or too soft of a message, the employees are talking to each other, and that's like when you talked about the vacuum earlier. The absence of any communication leads to the employees thinking the worst. Does that make sense to you?
It's absolutely the case, and they will come up with alternate scenarios, alternate reality that can undermine everything you're trying to do. And, of course, we're all working remotely. So this is, a lot more people are working remotely than ever have before. And yet there's lots of digital communication. So this is something that could truly spin out of control. You don't want to over communicate, but there is, again, reminding people that there's a we in all of this, and also delegating some tasks that you need to get done can just literally engage the people that are otherwise going to be coming up with memes.
So true, so true. So I think there's also the legal side of this whole issue, and that's the part I had wanted to talk about. And, Judy, you had raised so many good points or things that we should kick around. But then there's unfortunately, the lawyer side. So I have counseled a bunch of clients regarding how to communicate with the employees during the crisis. And some of, my clients really feel badly. They have pangs of guilt. They recognize that they're not going to be able to keep everybody on board at full salary, and when they have no idea of when they can be back up and running, depending upon the industry. So they've had to lay people off. They've had to do furloughs. They've had to cut salaries by 10, 15, or 20% to try to keep from having to lay off people. And these are things they're doing. So when they message their employees, their heart wants to say to them, it's temporary. It's only going to be for 2 weeks or 4 weeks. By May 15, we're going to be up and running full speed ahead. That's what their hearts are saying. And some of them who fortunately come to me before they message people and they put firm dates in there, I've counseled them not to do that. And the reason is, if they put a date in, it's almost as though it's a promise. And if they don't get up and running and get the people back by that date, it's possible that they can end up getting sued. Now, I'm not saying that they would win a lawsuit, but it's possible that the company could get sued. So the better thing to message is to talk about what we're doing to try to weather the storm, what steps we're taking, what you can do to help us in this process, and that we're doing the best we can to get everyone back as quickly as possible without putting a promise of a date. That could be something that they can argue they relied upon to their detriment, especially if maybe they could have found some other place to work during that time. So one of the things that I appreciate is when the clients come to me first, not the other way around. I did X, Y, and Z. Is that okay? Boy, that drives me nuts. The second thing I want to talk about is that although a lot of courts are either pretty much closed or totally scaled back on what they're doing, it doesn't mean that that law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe is not still in business. And there are lots of law firms out there taking on and filing lawsuits or lining up cases that they're going to bring at some point in the next 4 to 8 weeks. So one of the things that's really important is to understand the employment laws are still out there. And in this climate, and sadly, one group of people, Asian Americans, has been victimized by some harassment and bullying, both in terms of employment and outside of employment situations. So in your messaging, I think it's really important, especially with people working remotely and spending more time on social media interacting with colleagues, remind them that any interaction with your colleagues, whether or not you just was laid off temporarily, or you're furloughed, or you're still working, you still must treat each other free from any harassment and bullying. And it's important to reinforce that with your colleagues, because even in this environment, you still can get sued for some form of harassment. Look, just yesterday, McDonald's got hit with a class action case involving 100 of their franchises that are corporate owned in Florida. The case was filed in Illinois, and plaintiffs are seeking only $500 million. Not a big amount of money, but keep that in mind. And then in terms of the messaging that you have with customers or clients or the public, keep in mind that when you do message, you want to reinforce, as Judy was talking about, the core values, which are so very important. Keep reinforcing the core values, your mission, your brand, what sets you apart, what's your competitive advantage. Do all that, but just don't make promises. Again, like you don't want to promise an employee that they're going to return on May 15, you don't want to promise a customer something if you're not sure you're going to be able to deliver it. But go back to what your core values are and promise your best. I think that's what we need to be doing. And with that, I thank everybody for joining us today. And we've provided our contact information, so please feel free to reach out to Judy or to me if you would like to continue the conversation. Judy, it was such an honor to have a chance to work with you. This is something I've wanted to do for years. I'm sorry it had to be in the middle of a pandemic, but anything else you wanted to add?
No, I really like the way you brought it around. There are things you can say even now, and it's really important not to be a stranger. Remind everyone who you are and how you've always been, and you'll be there in the future. Thank you so much, David. It was great.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you all for attending, and good luck as we navigate these choppy waters for a bit more. Thank you all. Bye now.